What if the strangest thing your neighbor ever did was actually the one thing that could save your life? High in the frozen mountains, where winter could swallow an entire cabin in a single night, a lonely widow covered the walls of her tiny wooden home with hundreds of dried sunflowers. The villagers laughed at her. They called it foolish, ugly, even crazy. But when the worst blizzard in decades arrived, those same people would discover that every single sunflower had been placed there for a reason, and the truth would leave them speechless. So stay with me until the very end, because what this widow had hidden behind those flowers is something no one saw coming. And if you love emotional stories with powerful twists, please like this video and subscribe to Faiz Malik so you never miss the next story. Her name was Eleanor, and for nearly 12 years she had lived alone in a small cabin at the edge of a mountain village. Her husband, Thomas, had died during a winter rescue mission when an avalanche buried the road leading to the northern pass. He had been the kind of man who helped everyone, even when helping meant risking his own life. After his death, Eleanor refused to leave the cabin. It was the last place where she could still feel his presence. Every morning she woke before sunrise, made 2 cups of tea out of habit, and then quietly poured the second cup beneath the old pine tree where Thomas had once carved their initials. But there was one thing she did that confused everyone. Every summer, Eleanor planted sunflowers directly against the outside walls of her cabin. Not a few. Hundreds. She grew them tall and thick until they formed a golden curtain around almost every side of the house. By autumn, she gathered the dried stalks and carefully tied them together in bundles. Then she fastened those bundles to the cabin walls. To the villagers, it looked ridiculous. Why would anyone cover a wooden cabin with dead flowers? One afternoon, a young farmer named Daniel stopped outside her gate and laughed. "Eleanor, are you planning to turn that cabin into a giant bird's nest?" he joked. Eleanor smiled gently but said nothing. Daniel shook his head and walked away. Other villagers were less kind. Some whispered that grief had made her strange. Others said she simply wanted attention. Children sometimes counted the sunflower bundles and dared one another to touch them. Eleanor never became angry. She simply continued her work. She checked every bundle, replaced broken stems, and packed the stalks tightly against the walls. Before winter arrived, the cabin looked almost completely covered in dried sunflowers. Only the door, windows, and roof remained visible. What nobody knew was that Thomas had taught Eleanor something years earlier. During their first winter together, a terrible storm had trapped them inside a hunting shelter. Thomas had explained that dry plant material could create layers of trapped air, and trapped air could slow the movement of cold. He had also shown her how tightly packed stalks could reduce wind penetration and help insulate wooden walls. Eleanor remembered that lesson after his death. But she had discovered another use for the sunflowers. Their thick stalks could be tied into dense panels, creating a protective barrier around the cabin. The flowers were not decoration. They were Eleanor's winter armor. That year, however, the winter forecast was worse than usual. The mountain weather station warned of a massive storm forming far to the north. The village elders advised everyone to stock food, bring firewood indoors, and avoid traveling once the snow began. Daniel helped his family prepare. Most villagers ignored Eleanor, assuming her little cabin would never survive such a storm. Then, 3 days later, the sky turned strangely gray. Snow began falling before dawn. At first, it was beautiful. Soft flakes landed on Eleanor's sunflower-covered walls, turning the dead golden stalks white. But by afternoon, the wind became violent. Snow raced across the ground like smoke. Trees bent beneath the force of the storm. By evening, the mountain road disappeared completely. The village bell rang, warning everyone to stay indoors. Daniel stood at his window and watched the storm grow worse. He could barely see the house across the road. Then he remembered Eleanor. He looked toward the mountain. Her cabin was gone. Not destroyed, simply buried beneath the snow. For a moment, Daniel felt a terrible fear. He grabbed his coat, but his father stopped him. "You cannot go out there," the old man warned. "You won't make it halfway." Daniel stared through the window. "She's alone." Outside, the blizzard screamed through the village. And high above them, inside a cabin surrounded by hundreds of dried sunflowers, Eleanor was listening to something moving beneath the snow. She picked up her lantern. Then she smiled.